Well, now, this is about an incident that happened up in the White Mountains of Arizona, right on the top of the mountain, which is the altitude is high. Now, there was a lodge there owned by Jess Burke, and he there for quite a few years had a good pack of dogs, and he also run bearing line, and he took out clients for bearing line. Well, it's not over a mile and a half from there was an old fellow by the name of Josh, and he had a ranch there and was running cattle. And one morning or one night, he heard two lions up there, and they were right close to the road, a fighting. And so he went up there the next morning looking around, and he found one of these lions, and it was a pretty fairly good-sized male lion. And it was killed and partly eaten and covered up by another lion. So he just went out to Jess Burke's as fast as he could, and he told Jess Burke about it. And Jess Burke was at home. So old Jess just saddled up a horse and turned loose a pack of hounds, and back up there he come. And that was fairly early in the morning. And he picked up that lion's track that had left where he killed this one and eaten a part of him. And in about 2 or 3 hours, well, he finally trailed that lion up and caught him. And now he was quite a lot bigger male than the one he had killed. And when he caught this lion, well, he was scratched up considerable and showed his battle when he killed that one. So he just gutted him and looked in him, and all that was in him, in that lion's belly, was this other lion, and he was pretty full. But how come him to have to trail him so far from that kill? Well, he went quite a ways to, I guess, some favorite bluffs that he had where he wanted to lay up. And so he traveled that far, and he was pretty full, which a lot of the time they don't travel but just a very short distance before they'll lay up. And another incident was we were in the San Mateo Mountains of New Mexico on a lion hunt. And this famous brain surgeon, Rupert Rainey, that was with us, was on this hunt. And he had another fellow by the name of, can't remember this other fellow's name for sure, but he was the brother of quite a movie actress. But I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was a real bald-headed fellow, this friend of Rupert Rainey that was with him. And we was going to rope and tie up a big line if we could catch one, and this Rupert Rainey wanted to take pictures of it. And so we have this movie, and it's a pretty good movie of roping and tying this line. But anyway, well, when we started out this morning, there was an old boy there working for the Forest Service, and he wanted to go with us and had a saddle animal, so we let him go. So there was Clell Nye, and then we had Barty Henderson, a rancher there that had hunted with us before, and sometimes he furnished us horses, and he was with us. So, well, let's see, that would be Rupert Rainey and his partner, and Clell and Barty Henderson and I, so that'd be 5 of us. And we went back there and picked up the tracks of this big male lion, and he was a big lion. So we trailed him for quite a ways, and we kind of trailing him just down a small canyon, and the ridges wasn't steep on each side of the canyon, and the dogs got in there and they kind of made a lose. And we got down there right close to them and seen them run over there and smell, and looked over there and they were smelling a dead lion. And we went over and looked at that lion, and we knew that it hadn't been dead too long. And the way it was laying on its side there, it looked like that it just laid down and died. We got down and was examining it, and his head is all tore up, and we turned it over, and it had a big part of the other side eaten. And it was definitely killed by a lion. And there was the remains of a deer kill, and just little bitty pieces around there and just a few bones. And we found parts of this deer and these bones, and the dogs then lined this old male's tracks out, and away they went. Well, in about an hour, they jumped him and treed him. And the tree was easy to climb, but it was high, limbs right to the bottom of it. And this old Forest Service boy said, well, I never did go up a tree and put a rope on the line. Would you guys let me climb that tree? And we told him, said, well, we've been up trees and put ropes on them. If you want to climb that tree, well, you just go right ahead. So he took off his boots or shoes or whatever he had on, so he'd be in his sock feet. So the way we done it, well, we got him his stick to put on and a fork on it to ease the rope over the lion's head, and started him up the tree. Well, we knew that one rope wouldn't no way near reach that lion. So we tied another right rope to the end of this one. And that would make 60 feet of rope. And then we tied another rope on the end of that other one, another 30-foot rope. Well, he wasn't up that high, but when that old boy went to getting up close to that line just kept climbing higher and higher, and he went right through the top of that tree. And when he did, well, we could tell by the length of those ropes about how high that line was, and he was about 70 feet from the ground. And that old boy went on up, and it took him quite a while, but finally he said, well, I've got the rope on him. And so he just throwed that stick that he had with the fork on it, he just throwed it out, and down the tree he come. So we then grabbed all of our dogs, the lion had the rope on, and tied them back. And when that old boy hit the ground, well, old Trail 9 Barty grabbed that rope. Well, we didn't try to hang him over a limb or nothing, bring him down. We just jerked him right out. And he just broke those limbs as he come down. And when he hit, now he had just jerked right straight out, 70 feet up. And he jumped up and got kind of hit on his front feet and kind of his face. And he just jumped up off that hill he went, and I just sit down on him like a calf. And old Clell and Barty run around behind him, and I went to easing up, getting closer to him all the time. And they got him one of them got him by the tail, and they flipped him over, and I just held the rope to not choke him too much and to keep him from getting a hold of them. And they tied him there in just a little bit. And so then we took and went down there, and we had pack bags with us to put a line in. So we put him on that old wimpy mule, and we packed him on down, and we come out by that line that had been killed. So we just picked her up and took her with us and took her on into camp. And we had a cage already built for this line, because that's what that Rupert Rainey wanted. And so when we put this line in the cage, and now we went and got him in a pickup and turned him loose in the back of a pickup first, and then hauled him on in, and then we put him in the cage and took him out of the pickup. We just hauled him in the dog compartment right under, but we had her nailed down to where he couldn't get out, and then we put a rope on him in that pickup and pulled him out and pulled him in the cage. Well, then we skinned that line, and the hide was ruined, so we just kept the cape and the head. of this female that could be mounted all right. And then we finished skinning the rest of her, and the hide was no good. And so after about, well, I think the third night, we put some of this meat of this female lion in this cage with this old male, and he ate it. But I'm positive in my mind, I don't think that this old male is the one that killed her. Now, there was the tracks of another female there that had at least 2 cubs. And the cubs weren't too big. And I think that these 2 females fought, and I think that one female killed the other one, and then her and those kittens ate on her after they'd killed her, after the old female had killed her, because this was a grown female, but she was really worked over, and she had 2 holes right in her skull made by that lion's teeth that killed her, and I think it was the other female that done it. Well, now that is the same lion that we took back to Virginia when we went back making those lectures, and had this big lion in the back of a trailer that was had real heavy wire, and where you'd go along and people could see it in that trailer. Then we had a Buick car, and Playo's family was with him, his wife and little girl, and Playo and I had our 8 hounds in a pickup, and we went from Plumback and off and on. We stopped and made lectures and showed this lion and our hounds and Plumback to Middleburg, Virginia on that trip. And that was quite a trip. That was the first lecturing that I'd ever done. Well, I was a better talker than Clay, so I done most of the lecturing and most of the talking. And then so he was pretty good on the guitar, and he knew quite a lot of cowboy songs. So after this show was over, well, he'd pick up his guitar and he would strum it and sing them about 3 cowboy songs. And by golly, that went over, because here's the deal. We only got 45 cents out of every dollar that we made, because our sponsors and the theaters charged us that to show in those big theaters, and then sometimes they'd sponsor and take a big get in a car or pickup with a big loudspeaker on it and drive all over town when they wouldn't have time to advertise it, and maybe they'd do that for 2 or 3 hours and cover this town, telling about what they was going to show that night. Well, we had to give them 55 cents out of every dollar that we made. And but that was quite a deal. But let me tell you, when I first started doing that, that was the hardest work that I had ever done. I would be tired after it would take about 2 hours for all this to take place. And let me tell you, we held the people's attentions too. They wasn't getting up and running all around in the theater, or there wasn't half of them leaving and all that. They were sitting there because they were enthused. Well, now, after the shows, when we would be, now see, we'd take our dogs right up and put them right on the stage in these big theaters, with the theater just packed with some of them standing up, and somebody in every seat. And so then we'd be loading our dogs and loading their stuff, and we also had some mounted Jaguar hide with us, and I think 3 lions in a bear hide, all mounted into rugs with their head on. But it was kind of comical. At one theater, we went down into the audience and we picked out, I think we had 8 hounds. 8 husky-looking old boys. So we went out and got our hounds and had a boy holding each hound and brought them right into that theater and took them right up on the stage and lined them up. And so I told them, I said, folks, I'll show you what a pack of hounds sounds like when they see a lion or a bear or a jaguar or something that they're supposed to run. So we'd already put all of our, took our hides away from, we had them spread out up there and showed over. So I got one of these hides and just slipped up and stuck it was a lion hide, and stuck it up over the edge of that platform there, that theater that they is up on. And boy, what I mean, them old hounds just raised their heads and they bawled and bellowed, and they just made that theater ring. And one of them jerked one of these old boys down and jumped over there and drug him over there and grabbed that lion hide. And I had quite a time getting him loose. I thought he was going to tire for a hide before I could get him loose. And got him loose, and then I got out of there with that hide, and we got back and got our dogs back loaded back up in our pickup. And we would have a terrible time of doing anything, because people would be just crowded around us, asking us this question and that question about this and about that, and you could tell they were really interested, or they wouldn't have been crowding around you or trying to keep you from doing anything when we'd be tired and wanting to get back and get a little sleep. And they'd be still, when we'd drive off, there'd still be a big crowd standing there. Well, here's about what I call game on a limb. Now, a lot of these people that's got lots of money to get a trophy, they don't want to go out and go through the hardships of getting it. Well, and any honest guide frowns on a guaranteed hunt, because you don't always get what you go after. And if you're gonna, these guys that are great on the guaranteeings are the crooked guys. The honest ones don't want to do that. But here's the way that we have done quite a different number of times, is to get the line treed, then leave somebody with the hounds, and you go to the nearest telephone or something and phone somebody, and they know that it's up a tree when you telephone them, and come to you, and then you take them to the tree. Well, this time we was in those Catalina Mountains. That's right there by Tucson. And this fellow Rusty Gibbons had killed a lion, so his wife wanted one. So we had phoned them and knew that they'd be around home when we went out that morning. So we had our saddle animals in a big wire corral. It was made of barbed wire. I think it was five strands. And inside of this was a pretty good sized tree. Well, I think we took a horse, and we had 4 animals there, so there was 3 of us went. So we took 2 of the mules and the horse, and we left old Molly there. Well, I knew that she wouldn't. This is a big mare mule, and she was a big mule, but a good mountain mule, not too big for the mountains. I imagine she'd weigh around 1,100. I never did weigh her. That was just more or less my guess. But she was pretty tall, and I knew she'd get out of that wire trap some way or another. So I took and put a halter on her and tied her to this tree, and I tied her with a good rope. And we pulled out that morning with the pack of hounds. Well, of course, she was pawing around and jumping around when we left. Well, we'd got on down this ridge on this government trail, I imagine 2 or 3 miles, just before we hit a pretty good saddle there on that ridge, where it was a pretty good fast way for lions. And we heard the rocks cracking behind us and looked back, and here come old Molly. Well, she just had been in on many and many a hunt. She just followed along. She didn't want to stay by herself. And when mules are used to staying with one another or with some horses, well, now they want company, and they'll follow. So she didn't bother anything, didn't try to bother the dogs or nothing. And when we'd get down, go through a gate, well, she'd come up and come right on through, just like somebody riding her or leading her. So when we hit that saddle, well, we never found anything that looked very fresh, so we decided we'd drop down a canyon there and make a circle back around in the road that went up to Mount Lemon on that back side of the mountain. There wasn't the main road, but it's come out to the top to Mount Lemon there. That was kind of a summer resort for Tucson. It was pretty high altitude and lots cooler than down there in Tucson, where it was a lot lower and so hot. So we got down there pretty close to an old mine, and not too far from this road that came up from the backside, and picked up a good fresh lion track. I mean, that track was fresh. And those dogs didn't trail him far till they jumped him and treed him. And he was in hearing distance of that road. Well, I left two boys there that was with me, and I took one of their animals over, and old Molly would come in handy, because I caught old Molly and I could take her. So I took her and one of their animals over and tied them on the highway. Well, it took me quite a little while to get back up there to the telephone. I telephoned this fella, and he was at home, and I told him and his wife to come across the top of the mountain, and told them right where to meet me. Right where the road turned off to this old mine, and that I'd be awaiting there for them, and that I would have two saddle animals. And so I just went out and got back on my saddle animal and went back down there just fast as I could, which is about 3 miles. Well, I wasn't there but just a few minutes, and I saw this automobile coming in here. They was really coming off of that mountain. And they come down there and stopped, and I said, well, get out and get on these animals. And as they got out, they listened. They said, what's those dogs barking? I said, well, I told you we had a lion treat. They're barking at a lion. They said, well, by golly, that's lucky. So we went on over, and this woman got her line, and we packed it on back to the road where they could take their trophy and beat it to Tucson, then let a taxidermist skin it and take care of the hide and the mountain of the lion and all. And so Molly had kind of come in handy after getting out and following us, so we called it Molly Goes Lion Hunting and Lion on a Limb. And we have done that quite a few different times when people didn't want to go and didn't want to put out the effort, or maybe they something wrong and they couldn't, is to tree something and leave somebody with the tree, and then somebody else go after the clients to kill the animal. Well, this is about another hunt that we had in Venezuela. It is a little exciting. This has only been we'd only been hunting 2 or 3 days. With this was their second party. And we'd got to trailing in there, and we never jumped the old Jaguar. But the dogs found 3 cubs. and they got a hold of one of them and killed it, and they hurt the other one, and we got the other one without being hurt at all. And they were small, just could run around. And so we took them back to camp, and it was real hot. And I think, skinned out the little two hides of the ones that was dead, and we kept this other one around camp. And feed him, and he'd eat and run all around there. And so early the next morning then, we went over right back to where we found these little kittens, and the old mother had been back after them, and she had just literally made tracks all over that country. And the dogs, they trailed and they trailed and they trailed, and the dogs got split up on different tracks. And all the tracks is about the same freshness, and they could smell her everywhere. And so we had got in the jungle there, and let's see, there was Ray Watson, I believe, and that Bill Wakefield from Bill's Place, Pennsylvania, and Ray Watson from Levelland, Texas, was in there with me. All four of them was over there, and the other two was with Clell, and there's a couple of natives around there with us. Well, we finally got quite a ways back in there, and it was getting pretty well up in the day, and it was getting hot. So we got down there, right in the jungle, and in a little old sand wash, and the sand was wet and good and wet and kind of a little cool in there. So we just sat down and just stretched our legs out in front of us, and was kind of leaning back and listening to the hounds trail. And now in a minute I heard something running, and I looked around, and a Jaguar hit that canyon just about a jump or two from us, and come down, and I had started trying to get up, and it jumped right over her legs, and I throwed my rifle over and hit this old female on the back as she went over our legs. And one of these we jumped up right quick then, and one of these guys says, "Well, boy," says, "I might not get one." But he said, "I'll tell you, I was close to one." And here that some of the dogs come, they scattered around there, and here some of them come right after it, and they got together, and they run it quite a little ways and bait it and got up there. And one of these fellows got his trophy right there. And boy, it tore up some of our dogs when it bayed on the ground. It didn't tree. And we had this little black and tan female that it tore up so, she just barely could, I believe that Clell carried her part of the time, getting back to this old power wagon that would come over there in. And when we got back to camp, we were lucky because we had that doctor in camp with us, Dr. Brody McDade. So two different dogs from that race, we put them up on the table there, and by golly, he sewed them up. And that make them so they'd get well a lot faster, and they could hunt her lots quicker. But that was really, we didn't have time to get excited, because I never will forget that. Well, I just looked around, and it was already there. And over our legs it went. And boy, I just kind of throwed my gun over and hit it on the back as it went by. And I guess that gave it a good start. But here come those hounds. I think there was, I think we had 5 or 6 hounds, and there was one of them quite a ways ahead of the other. And here come 2 more, and then they all came. They was all there fairly close, and they got in the race. But that little female that it hurt, she was a real hound. Well, now, this happened in the White Mountains of Arizona. And it was in the summertime. I think it was in June, when it was pretty hot. Well, I'd been exercising the dogs around there, and that morning, well, I didn't go out. And let's see, it was about 9:30. Here rolled this old road truck into camp, and they was really going. And they got out, and I knew these two fellows well, and they said, "Say, down yonder, there's a big male lion run across the road." And we seen him at 8 o'clock. We looked at our watch. And I said, "Do you fellows know that that was a lion for sure?" They said, "Well, for God's sakes, we have seen lions, and we have been right up at them, and we know what a lion looks like, and we were right at this lion. And so we won't, if you want to go down there and try to catch him, well, one of us will go back down there and show you right exactly where he crossed that highway. And the other one will stop down here and go to work. But we can't stay down there because when we show you that track, we got to get back and get to work." And I said, "Well, it'll take me a little while to get ready." I said, I've got to hook up to that horse trailer and run down there in the meadow and get me a saddle animal." They said, "Well, we haven't got time for you to fool around and go get a saddle animal and hook up to a trailer and load your dogs and all of that." Said, "Now you just load your dogs in the pickup that you want to take, and by golly, go afoot." Says, "That line shouldn't be any distance." I said, "Yeah, you guys are trying to get me into a doggone big, long, hard walk. Oh, that line won't be far." And I said, "All right, then I'll, if that's the only way I can get a run at him, well, I'll do that, because they're paying a big bounty down there." And it was quite a long distance, way back down the highway and in lots of lower country that I was camped in. So away we went, and one fellow got out, and the other one went with us, and we got down there, and there was this highway going around the side of this ridge and kind of going down there. Well, here was a fellow there, and he had a boy about 12 years old, and hearing all this. And they run over to me, and this man did, and said, "How about us going with you?" I said, "Well, now listen, we'll be afoot, and I don't think that boy can keep up." He said, "Well," he said, "I'll stay with him. If we can't keep up, you just go on, don't pay any attention to us." And I said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care." So when I jumped in the pickup after I loaded, I think I loaded 9 hounds, and I loaded 1 pup. Well, away we went. Well, we went down there just as fast as we could. Well, we got there just at 11 o'clock. It was all downhill from the camp down there. And, 'cause I looked at my watch, it's just 11 o'clock, and that old boy stopped the truck, and I run up and parked the pickup right on the side of the road a ways. And he said, "Well, come here, and I'll show you right where that line crossed." And it was real hard ground there and rocky, and you couldn't see a track at all. So he said he jumped up the highway right here, and they'd marked it. And said he went right on up. About 50, 75 yards from there, there's a little pinon tree sitting there. And he says he went in under that tree and right up towards the top of that little ridge right there. And he just got back in his truck and turned her around and pulled out. So I went to the pickup and took out 2 of the best coal trailers that I had, and to start them on the track. So I let them fool around there for quite a while before I ever tried to show them that track and clean out and all that. So then I took these 2 hounds down there, and one of them was an old dog that was halfway between the color of a blue tick and a red tick, a speckled dog. And He was a fairly old hound, and he was a cold trailing dog. He was Clales. We called him Thunder. And then had this little black and tan female that is half blue tick and half black and tan, and she was a black and tan color, and she was good on a cold trail. So I took him down there and tried to put him on that track, right where he jumped up the bank. And now, picture, that was only a 3-hour-old track, and they couldn't even smell that enough there to bark on it. They couldn't smell it at all. So I just kept fooling with them, and finally walked on up the hill to that where he said he went under that, walked under that little old pinon tree. So I called them there, and I showed them the track, and they both went to smelling, and they could smell it just a whiff there. But they did smell it enough to open on it. So I just went back to the pickup and took out the rest of the dogs, and I thought that was too hard a track. I knew that pup couldn't smell it, and I thought maybe he might run off after a deer and get away from me afoot. Well, he might have horseback too. So I just left him tied and took the others, and I went on up. Well, I went on up to the top of this ridge, and it was just sparse pinon trees there. Was out of the pine country. Right in there wasn't any pines to any size, as I remember. Maybe a sparse pine here and there, but not right there wasn't. So it was kind of rocky, going down this ridge and into a little saddle and then up a mountain. So along on that ridge in those rocks, they picked it up, and they could smell it. But it was really hard for them to trail it. Well, they trailed down and they crossed that saddle. And by that time, it was getting hot. About 200 yards from there was a tank of water. So I just took them off and went down and watered them out. Come back and put them right on that track, and they went right up. And now in a minute, they went to picking it up lots better and picking up speed, and they turned right to the right. Just right to the right sharp. And I then didn't know what had happened. And they trailed around and then came right pretty close to the highway, and across a kind of a little rim right up above the highway. And when they got to the end of that rim, they turned right off the hill and crossed that highway. And right on down the hill, and then they circled back, and here they come and trailed right up pretty good, right to where these fellows had seen that line across the highway. And I said, uh-oh, I know what happened. That line had just looped its tracks. So I went, got the dogs and took them back to that water and watered them for quite a while. And watered them out and let them get in the shade and cool off some there. Well, instead of going back then and putting them right on the track where they had turned around the mountain when they picked up speed, I cut in above there, a quarter or half a mile up the hillside, and pretty back towards pretty high up on that mountain. And they picked her up, and they went the right way, and they strung out. Well, that thing had went a long ways, and they just kept trailing it at a good speed. And I finally run off and left that fellow and his boy, and I imagine in about an hour, they jumped that thing, and he didn't run any distance. After they jumped him, he probably didn't run over a quarter of a mile, and they treed him. So I got over to the dogs when they treed and was wanting that boy and his daddy to see that line. So I waited there a while, and then I hollered. And they finally answered me way back up there, and I told them, I said, well, these hounds are treed, and I'm right here under this line, and he's up a tree. They said, well, for goodness sakes, if you can, wait for us. We'd sure love to see it. So they came on down there then, and we waited there a while, and the dogs was a barking treat real good, and this fellow says, you know, said, I've never killed a lion. And I said, well, do you want to kill this one? He said, I'd sure love to. Then I'd have something to talk about. I said, all right, as far as I'm concerned, you can kill it. So he took my rifle and he killed the lion. And I said, all right, you've killed the lion. Now you get down here and help me skin that thing, because we sure can't take him back. And he said, all right. So we sat down there and skinned it just as fast as we could. And that was pretty late in the afternoon when we got all that done. And we hadn't had anything to eat either. So just as soon as we got him skinned, well, this fellow and I would take turnabout of carrying the hide, and we started back to the truck. And when we walked into that truck, well, it was somewhere around a half an hour or to an hour after dark. But it's good and dark when we finally got back to that truck. And we loaded everything up and went back to camp. And of course, by the time we got back to camp, I got my dogs all put away and fed and all, and got me something to eat. Well, it was way late in the night. And I said, the next guy that comes along and talks me out of taking any saddle animal or anything when I'm going to go to catch a lion, well, I'm going to tell him to go jump in the lake. But now I can tell you the reason that they couldn't trail that lion is good right there where he'd cross the highway, as they did on up there when they went around, trailed back down, and came into where, and crossed the highway again, and then come up to where them guys had seen him. I said, now that lion was kind of scared, and I know that at times when animals are scared, they can control their scent to a pretty good degree. They can hold it and quit putting out the scent that they would ordinarily when they're just traveling along. Now, I've been trailing lions and been right with my dogs. When a lion would locate a deer and was going to try to stalk it and jump on it, and when they do that, your track just practically plumb ends right there, because now they're controlling their scent when they're the stalking game. And they usually don't stalk them for a long distance, because they're usually within I'd say 100 yards or less of a deer when they really see it, and maybe a little farther, maybe 150 yards. And you can usually find where that they've either caught the deer or the deer's got away, and then their scent's normal and you can go on after them. Well, now, this is a lion hunt that took place in the Chiricahua when we lived at Paradise. That was many years ago. Now, this neighbor boy and I, Elmer Franklin, had took a camp and moved to the top of the mountain up there and camped at an old log cabin that was in a little park, and they called it Barfoot Park. And as we went up, we found a deer there that was diseased. Something was wrong with it, and it was down and it couldn't get up. So we didn't want our dogs fooling around it or anything, so we just rode on, just left it there, because we knew it was going to die, but we didn't want to get down and kill it or anything, and our dogs there, and the dogs went up and smelled of it, and we just made them leave it alone. They didn't even bark at it or nothing, and it could move its head around and all, but it couldn't get up, and it looked like it was just poor as a snake. And we just rode on. Well, in the next day or so or something, we were hunting and come down by there, and that deer had been eaten on by a lion. And the dogs could trail it. And this was a good big female lion. And we trailed it a ways, and they're trailing it pretty good, and they hit this road. Well, when they hit this road, that killed the track. And we finally got to fooling around, and it was pretty rocky there, but just where the cars had run, there's just a little bit of dust. And so this old boy got down and was crawling along on his hands and knees at that track. And the dogs, they was all around looking in the casting and trying to find that track. And I saw a car coming, so I run back up the road a little ways and stopped this car up there ways. And I noticed, I've forgotten now what state, but it's now the state car. And I said, I wish you folks would wait here for a minute if you're not in too big a hurry. And they said, well, why? What's wrong? And then finally one of them, it was a man, I guess, and his wife, and one of them says, what's the matter with that fella down there? Well, I couldn't think of a good answer to give them. If I'd have told them that he was trailing a line, they would have thought I was crazy. So I said, he's having some kind of a little old fit, but I don't think it amounts to anything. They said, well, do you reckon that he's bad off? I said, no, I don't. I said, I think he'll be all right in a while. And they said, well, we don't mind waiting here a little bit. And after a while, he kind of got up, kind of staggered around a little, and then motioned with his head to me the way the line had went. And I knew pretty well what was taking place, so I told him, I said, well, now, y'all can go on, but I wish you'd go slow here for a ways and not be sure and not run over one of our hounds. They said, oh, no, says, we will. And they was going down a pretty good hill, and so they went slow till they got through the hounds and all, and then they went on, and we run back and got on our saddle animals, and then this boy had found where this line had walked off the side of the road, and we called our dogs and put them on the tracks where it got down. And now this was up in the mountain where it hit off of the road, and we put them on it, and they picked her right up. And after about 4 or 5 hours, and a long ways from there, they jumped that line. And that line put up quite a race. I'll bet that line run a mile and a half before it treed. But they treated way over there in a canyon that we called Who's Canyon. And that was a long ways from where we had started that morning. And so it took us till after dark to get back to our camp at the old log cabin in Barfoot Park, which is certainly a beautiful place.